Hey folks, Scott Weingart here, and this is an MCRIT We. Got a lot of feedback that people like the roundtable discussions between the MCRIT team. And for this one, we had Kyle-Sidell as well. And this was from our Sunday night COVID call. And we're discussing COVID ventilation. And we're just batting around ideas. Now, during this, I introduced the COVID low PEEP scale. That, just to put the proviso out there, is solely for a thought experiment. Please do not start doing this clinically unless for whatever reason you vetted it through your own sources and decide it's a good idea. It's just there as a nidus for conversation. All right, let's get right into it. It's we jump in media res. Kyle's about to tell us his latest ideas about what the pathophysiology for the ventilatory failure of COVID is.
What I'm seeing, and I know it's crazy, but the hypoxemia I feel like I'm witnessing is actually a diffusion hypoxemia. And I know that sounds nuts, like an acute diffusion hypoxemia, but that's the only thing that's actually really fitting for me, and why they're not having problems with CO2 and why they exercise. Anything that pushes transit time makes it worse, transit time through the lungs. And then what I'm seeing is when you get put on the vent, bam, you get massive EQ mismatch from there on. So, I think that, it's crazy, but I really feel like this is a progressive acute diffusion hypoxemia, which then turns into, the maladaptive vasoconstrictor pulmonary response. And then they get put on the vent and they get massive EQ mismatch. And so, really what I think we're seeing is ventilator-induced injury with positive pressure that turns into a VQ mismatch. And so, I think part of the reason they're recruitable per se is because they may have hydrostatic pulmonary edema. And that's what you're seeing. And then you kind of, so-called recruit them, and then you're left with this massive VQ mismatch and cleaning up this damage. That's what I feel like I'm seeing, even though it sounds crazy.
So I guess my question, I almost do APRV and CPAP on all my patients. And so these are patients I found it very challenging. And my question is, Josh, what do you mean by recruitable? And because I too find that I can get their oxygen up with APRV, but I do it. And if you actually check their driving pressures, I actually increase their driving pressures when I do it. And so I think I'm over distending them. And I don't find the main issue in the long-term management of these patients is oxygenation. I think most of them, the data would kind of back me up, most of them die of multi-organ failure. And I can get their oxygen up. It's just everything else downstream goes to hell. And so my concern with APRV, it's not even a concern. I just don't know what I'm doing with it, because I put them on APRV and they can breathe on their own within a few hours of APRV, and I can have them on CPAP, and it's not a problem of recruitment. It's more a problem of slowing down their rate and finding that happy medium of getting them breathing on their own and not having them overbreathe at the same time.
And if they're recruitable, their compliance should get better, right?
Right. Like when I traditionally use APRV in people with true ARDS, you watch them, you put them on APRV, they can't breathe, they take tiny tidal volumes, and they do it really fast, and you have to either slow them down or paralyze them at that point. But over time, their release volumes get larger, and then their own tidal volumes get bigger, and eventually you can bridge them to CPAP safely. These patients, I find almost instantaneously, they're taking massive tidal volumes, and their compliance, their release volumes are huge on like APRV settings of 20 over 0. And so I almost don't know what I'm doing with it. I basically have them on CPAP almost instantaneously.
So to backtrack, my definition of recruitability is like a really dumb bedside definition. It's not one of these fancy physiology definitions. It's basically, if I could put someone on APRV and their FiO2 requirement drops from like 100 to 50, then I'd call that recruitment. And it causes confusion because it's not the same definition that Gattinone is using, and it's not the same definition that a lot of people in Europe are using. But I agree with you, Rory. I have the same issue. I feel like I put them on APRV, and I think there are some people who can be comfortable on it and do well on it. But then I think there are some people who, I think they have like microvascular thrombosis, or they have like crazy ass dead space, and they want to just breathe at like fucking like 25 liters a minute.
But is it dead space? Because they manage their CO2s just fine. Like, do you
Some
think,
of them
Until
eventually,
they're on
I
the
think,
vent, though.
well, until a few days on the vent, but initially on the
Yeah.
vent, you can ventilate them just fine.
I agree. I think some of them do accumulate it over time, though.
Sure. You're saying it's related to the disease process, or how everyone you put on the vent accumulates dead space?
I think there's something about their pulmonary vasculature where some of them get like microthrombosis and they develop like crazy dead space. I've seen it a couple times, not all the time.
I guess it's just how we actually kind of align all this into, because we focus so much on these vent settings, but I find in the end most of them, there are a few that are refractory and you can't ventilate them, but most of them you can end up ventilating. It's just all the other problems kind of start to outpace it towards the end.
Have you ever seen, I mean, we've taken people really far on high flow. I mean, I'm almost to the point where like I'll take them till they're almost bradycardic, because we're getting better at not doing that. But have you ever seen anyone go into multi-organ failure if they weren't on the vent? I have never seen it. I've seen 50, 100 patients, old, young. I've never seen anyone tire out. We're talking about, I mean, I'm watching people that are on max high flow with a non-rebreather satting 85, breathing 52 times a minute. And there's no way they could have a bad, low compliance, because they would be tired, And so it seems to me that really they will die before they will turn into the H type, So it's hard for me now not to believe that what we're seeing is just, unavoidable, because they have to have a viable PaO2, but unavoidable lung injury from the vent. And I don't more and more, I just don't believe it's a natural part of this disease.
Yeah. I mean, I almost think we focus too much on the H type. I think the H type is like, ARDS is happens in many disease processes toward the end stage when people get sick.
Yeah.
But more than the H type, it's a multi-organ failure that happens that is a real concerning problem. I mean, the H type is ARDS. We can deal with that most of the time. It's everything else that I think we kind of have glossed over in this whole story.
I agree with that statement. And I also agree that I haven't seen anyone progress to that multi-system on some form of non-intubated oxygen provision.
But has anyone found like I've been searching for initially I thought we're over PEEPing them and we're causing right heart failure, and I can't find any signs of that. The microthrombi, well, it's something. It doesn't seem that pervasive in most of the studies. And you would think if it was, you would have some signs of right heart strain if it really became to the point. The recent PATH studies I've read, the kidneys had no microthrombi in them, so it's hard to imagine that's the cause of their kidney.
I mean, I'm going to get a lot of shit for this, but we're submitting an IRB tomorrow to use Diamox and Fetapine, and I know people are going to go nuts. But I feel like literally the only thing that makes sense is, it looks like a hydrostatic regional pulmonary edema. Why would we ever expect that if humans have this, because their PaO2s are 50 when they're on the top of a mountain, that they wouldn't have it when their PaO2s are 50 progressively, here. I'm sometimes like.
So let me push back to Josh's post a little bit, because I as usual, found so much to love there. And then the question, I don't have an answer, because I don't have firm foundation to say you're wrong. You very well might be right, but I want to push back against each logical step it took you to get to where you are of avoiding the high FiO2. Because the first step in my mind is that we have to agree that we're not talking about hyperoxemia, right? Because no one's going to do that. Is that fair so far, Josh?
So, yeah, I mean, the mixed, the oxygen saturation in blood, exiting the right ventricle will not be high, but ventricle. The left ventricle. But some parts, if you're giving the patient a high FiO2, then some alveoli will be seeing that.
Agreed. No, that goes without saying. But I'm saying we're not going to roll in people that are dumb and keeping patients on 100% with a SAT of 99%. So that we're just going to take off the table, because we agreed that's bad practice. No one should be doing that. All right. So we'll get rid of that. So now the next thing is hyperoxia without hyperoxemia, which is the contention you made in the post is deleterious, right?
I mean, I think that there's a certain FiO2 above which that can cause oxygen toxicity. And I don't know exactly what number that is. I'm usually not super crazy about it, but I do think that that exists.
Well, we know it exists in animals.
Yeah.
The human data is more fraught, and I'm actually, after your post, I started pulling some of it to work up a rebuttal. It's very mixed picture as to whether it does or doesn't. Now, if you ask a hyperbaric guy or gal, they'll tell you for sure it is the worst thing in the world. It's burning their lungs with acid and, basically setting them on fire. But there's some built-in bias to that because they're...
I mean, honestly, my primary concern with like a low PEEP, high FiO2 strategy isn't necessarily the high FiO2. I think it's more of like a whatever theoretical / squishy thing. It's really the low PEEP. I think if we under PEEP patients, they're going to get atelectic trauma.
So this is, one potential for how to reconcile what you quite astutely point out is the real problem, which is under PEEPing. So what if they use the PEEP scale like this?
I think it's
you
way
start
too
at 60
little.
and 5. Now you're drifting up on your PEEP and your FiO2, but you're definitely heavier on FiO2 than you would have been with even the low ARDSNet scale.
If you put in a little thing that said if they get hypotensive, stop.
Yes.
Then I'd be all for it.
Brilliant.
I mean, my whole thing is I tell the residents their vitals should be the same after you intubate them as before. And I believe that.
Yeah, that's very fair.
I'm really not a big fan of this. I got to say.
Tell me. This is not
but seriously,
foreign idea. This was my rebuttal to how you could reconcile making sure that experienced people would still get adequate PEEP to avoid the possibility of inadequate PEEP being the reason that they're desaturating.
So you have the concept of APRV, which is basically like continuous recruitment and like maximum mean airway pressure. Right. And then you have this like low PEEP scale and they're like completely diametrically opposed to one another.
Oh God, no, not at all. But I'll tell you why after. Finish your point. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
So it seems like you're kind of embracing two things which are like completely the opposite of one another. Like either mean airway pressure is good or mean airway pressure is bad.
So I'm going to call you a little on that because APRV, the concept is to get you back to your FRC, and the assumption with disease processes that need APRV is that you're PEEP dependent. And so if any of us are put on APRV, we don't feel so good because it over-distends us. And so if you have a disease process like this, which has normal compliance, you might not need much PEEP to put you at FRC. And so I'm not a big fan of this either, but I don't think you need a high mean airway pressure for a disease process like COVID lung.
And I'll go a step further. Everything Rory said, I agree with, but it's more than that. So if you're above the lower inflection point, you're not going to de-recruit. If your PEEP is above the lower inflection point, you're not going to de-recruit. But you're not going to take areas of the lung that are more difficult to recruit if you're at CPAP at that pressure. But having a driving pressure above that is capable in many circumstances to recruit alveoli that wouldn't have been recruited at that CPAP pressure, and then the CPAP above the lower inflection will maintain. And that is the principle of why the PEEP scale for ARDS is there, is because the recruitment pressure necessarily must be higher than the avoidance of de-recruitment pressure.
Okay.
So as long as your PEEP is set above that, and look, this is all bullshit because we're pretending the lungs are a homogeneous thing, and they're obviously not, but that's the idea, is that if you give breaths above the avoidance of de-recruitment PEEP, then you will keep recruitment and gain new recruitment simply by the fact that your plateau pressure is above your PEEP.
But why use a table at all? Why not just, why not do...
Because this table only exists to give a credence to what Josh said, that in the hands of inexperienced people, in some patients, putting them on 100% and just titrating the PEEP, which is what in general I've been doing, because I will work my way back down on the FiO2 when I have bedside evidence of it. It's not going to happen in inexperienced clinicians, which is many of the people managing the vent.
So but I think my contention is I don't think you can use your SAT response to PEEP as a marker of recruitment. Yeah. Disease. I think you'll overdistend. I think you have to actually measure compliance of the lung.
No, I think if you uncouple compliance and SAT, you will find that the patient's best compliance and lowest driving pressures are not at an adequate SAT. They will be SATing 79 where their lungs are the most compliant. And then I found that I have to make a decision to purposely overdistend them to achieve the SAT I want, or leave them at 79? And I don't know the answer to that.
And if you actually go back and look at the original ARMA trial, in the first 3 days of their illness, they had better SATs and better CO2s in the high volume group than in the other group, right? And so you can make numbers look better and do damage at the same time.
Okay, well, I left out the crucial piece, which was intrinsic, because we've been talking about it for so damn long, but it needs to be here, which is goal saturation greater than, I don't know where, but probably 80 or 85.
Yeah, I'm saying 80.
I mean, I think you still uncouple. I don't think you put them in a table together. I think you find your ideal compliance based on a driving pressure, and then you get your SAT to anywhere above, or as close to 90 as you can on whatever FiO2 that is.
That seems to require more experience and knowledge than may work for the people I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because what you describe is what I've been doing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that's translatable.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it should be pretty simple, right? It's just a simple math formula.
Dude, people don't know how to do plateau pressure.
I know. But you're right.
Well, okay, let's look at it from the opposite side. What would be harmed by this that would be not worse by just saying put them on 100% unless their SAT's greater than 95, and then titrate your PEEP through some arbitrary mechanism, which is what seems like most people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I find at 14 you'll overdistend some people.
Yeah, me too. I think it's true.
And
you say that as you put a patient on APRV with a P high of 20.
Well, yeah, but I've basically stopped doing that at this point. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, because I can't. If you put them on, I find if you put them on APRV at a P high of 20, you've overdistended them, and they don't need it. They go to CPAP almost instantaneously.
And what CPAP are you putting them on?
Like 10, 12,
on CPAP of 8,
10 or 12, yeah, somewhere around there.
But 14 is going to overdistend them.
It's crazy, but yeah, their driving pressure shoot up. It really does. Like their driving, if you put them on. So the way I find you have to do this, because you look at the data and it just doesn't, like what's published out there and what our experiences are seems so contrary to each other, right? Like people are talking about compliances of 30 and plateau pressures in the 40s, and none of this data says when that was measured in their disease process. And then the other part is if you put them on the vent and then titrate them up a standard ARTNet PEEP FiO2 table, you will overdistend them. And if you measure them at that point, they'll look like they have poor compliance. So I think you paralyze them, you intubate them, and then you put them all on 400 and 450 and a PEEP of 5 and see what their compliance is at that point. But I'll find as you titrate up, they did overdistend so quickly. Mm-hmm.
And
but yes.
I mean, I think that what I've found is that there's nothing inherent about this disease which should cause hypotension. I haven't seen it. People don't come to the ER hypotensive. They're on high flow for 7 days. They're not hypotensive. So I really think that, it's a combination of overdistension and probably hypovolemia, which is, crazy because that's just the opposite of what we would usually do and what we would think.
Josh? I don't know if this is good or bad that I've stunned in silence. I've never done that before.
Yeah,
I'm
not going to be a big fan of this. I'm sorry.
I know. I'm not looking for it. It's a nidus for conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you able, Josh, to put them on APRV and not have hypotension?
Yeah, I haven't had it be a problem. I mean, sometimes they're on a couple mics of norepi, but they're also on propofol and a bunch of other stuff. No, I think Rory's approach, makes sense to me. Kind of just, personalizing the settings. I think that's fine. I just feel like I'm not incredibly comfortable just proposing a completely novel way to ventilate patients that's never been validated before. So a standard PEEP table has been proven to work. A high PEEP table has been proven to work. APRV, we kind of know that works. Those are all relatively standard vent modalities, and what you want to use is fine. And if you want to measure stuff and kind of, personalized stuff like Rory's saying, I think that's also kind of mainstream. But I feel like proposing a low PEEP table that's never been validated, it just seems a little wonky.
I mean, I've just never had a patient who got a PEEP over 10 and their driving pressure went down. I mean, always past 10, it seems like their driving pressures go up. And that's,
I've had a few people who are really obese need like 12.
Yeah, the obese ones maybe, yeah, the big ones. And I do think that APRV is probably your best way, kind of once they have ARDS, to get them out of this, and perhaps, if you're going to do some damage, that it may be the best way to get out of it. I don't know.
I found that, my experience, and I'm pretty frustrated. My experience is decreasing in velocity because Vermont has completely crushed their curve. So I haven't had that many new patients to try this shit on. But I found APRV to work the best initially when they come in and you can recruit the whole lung. For some patients who I've inherited who've been fucked up at outside hospitals, I feel like once they get ARDS and fibroproliferative disease and they get these foci of fibrosis, the APRV doesn't work as well because you can't recruit the whole lung.
Well, it's also everything else is failing as well at that point. It's not an isolated ARDS in my experience. Their lungs are gone and they're on pressors and they're in shock at that point. So it's a bad disease then.
But you still have two people, Josh, saying that they don't want CPAPs above 10 unless the patient is a true fatty. And you're starting APRV, I can't imagine you're starting a P high less than 20. In fact, some of your posts have said 25, 30. So how do we reconcile these two things?
Yeah, I don't know how.
Are you letting them breathe up there, or are you just sedating them and ventilating with your release volumes?
No, I'm letting them breathe.
And they breathe okay?
I'm like clobbering that with olanzapine and some fentanyl boluses and trying to sedate them a bit.
Has the olanzapine done anything?
It's really interesting. There's a group of people with you give them like a low dose ketamine infusion, olanzapine, Tylenol, and they can actually do pretty well and reach a RASS of -1.
What are you 5, 10?
10 BID.
Oh, PO or an NG rather?
Yeah.
But when you say how are they breathing at that point?
They'll be taking some breaths over the APRV.
But like normal, healthy looking tidal volumes?
Yeah. You're making me feel guilty. I may be
no.
Why? This is all just batting crap around.
I mean, I don't know. I've just found even at the lowest APRV settings, their release volumes are huge and their compliance is great. And I just don't need the release volumes. And then I'm pretty sure I'm over distending them when I'm up at a CPAP of 17.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Very good.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Yeah. Bye.